The ink on the decree was barely dry when the notification arrived. My lawyer warned me Mark moved fast, but this broke the sound barrier. I sat in my empty kitchen, staring at the screen while a hysterical sound bubbled up from my chest. I eventually told my sister the truth. A week after our divorce, my ex-husband married his perfect dream woman. But when I saw her face, I couldn't stop laughing, because she was... The sentence trailed off, because the punchline was too absurd to speak aloud just yet. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and aggressive lemon polish. I sat alone on my side of the mahogany table. Mark didn't even show up to end our 10-year marriage. He sent his shark of a lawyer, a man with a shiny suit and dead eyes, to slide the final papers across the wood. Mr. Vance sends his regrets, the attorney said, not sounding regretful at all. Mark was too busy building his next life, brick by expensive brick, to look back at the rubble he left behind. It began with a frantic lie 3 weeks ago. Mark claimed he had a massive crisis at the firm requiring travel. He packed a bag with nervous energy, throwing silk ties and Italian leather shoes into his suitcase. "Don't wait up, Rachel," he said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold and detached. I believed him because I was trained to. I worried about his stress levels while he drove straight to her. He wasn't going to the office to work. He was going there to resign. I discovered the truth when I called his executive assistant the next day. She sounded confused, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "Mr. Vance cleared his desk yesterday. Rachel, didn't he tell you?" The phone nearly slipped from my clammy hand. He hadn't just left his job, he had liquidated his assets and closed our joint accounts. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a calculated demolition. He planned this exit for months, curating a new existence while I was busy planning our anniversary dinner. The betrayal was absolute. Now, staring at the wedding announcement on my phone, the timeline clicked into terrifying place. He wasn't just leaving me, he was replacing me. A text message suddenly popped up from a blocked number, bypassing my filters. It was Mark. "She is everything I ever wanted, Rachel. She is physically and mentally perfect. She understands status." He needed me to know he had upgraded. He wanted to twist the knife one last time. But he made a fatal mistake sending that link. He didn't check who he was actually marrying. I clicked the link to the wedding website, my fingers trembling against the glass. The page loaded a professional engagement photo, high resolution and glossy. There was Mark, looking tan and triumphant in a linen suit, and there, clinging to his arm, was the perfect woman. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen. The eyes were unmistakable. The tilt of the chin was familiar. The hysteria finally broke through my throat. I wasn't crying anymore. I was laughing because I knew exactly who she used to be. The laughter died in my throat, leaving a raw, scraping silence in the kitchen. I needed to be sure before I lost my mind completely. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Mutual friends were texting me with carefully worded condolences. Dancing around the digital explosion Mark had just detonated. "So sorry you had to see that," one message read. They thought I was crying over a broken heart. They didn't realize I was staring at the greatest con job of the decade. I wiped my eyes and opened the gallery. Mark's caption was nauseatingly poetic, praising her natural elegance and timeless grace. I scrolled through the carousel of images. The ceremony was in Santa Fe, framed by red rocks and golden sunsets that cost a fortune to rent. The bride, identified only as Chloe, wore a silk slip dress that hugged curves engineered for Instagram. Her nose was a delicate slope, her jawline sharp enough to cut glass. She looked like every other influencer on the planet. But I knew those wide, terrified eyes. I pinched the screen, expanding the image until the pixels blurred slightly. There, just above her left eyebrow, was the faint white line of an old scar. It was barely visible under layers of professional airbrushing, but I remembered the day she got it. We were in 10th grade gym class. A volleyball had gone rogue, smashing her glasses into her face. She had cried in the locker room for an hour, terrified of the swelling. Chloe didn't exist back then. Her name was Brenda. Brenda Mills was the girl who sat in the back of AP History, hiding behind oversized hoodies and frizzy hair. She was brilliant but painfully awkward. The kind of invisible that Mark usually despised. He used to mock girls who tried too hard, claiming he only wanted authentic beauty. The irony tasted metallic in my mouth. He had left me, a woman who aged naturally, for a masterpiece of surgical reconstruction. He didn't marry a person. He married a very expensive, very convincing mask. I ran to the closet and dug out my dusty senior yearbook. The heavy binding cracked as I flipped through the pages, searching for the M section. There she was. Brenda Mills. The photo showed a girl with a different nose, a receding chin, and teeth that hadn't yet met a veneer specialist. The eyes were the same though. They held that same desperate need for approval that I saw in the wedding photos. She had erased her history to become Mark's trophy. A strange calm settled over me, replacing the shock. Mark prided himself on his ability to spot a fake. He lectured me constantly about honesty and pedigree, obsessing over good stock. Like he was breeding racehorses. He had no idea. He thought he had won the lottery with a genetic marvel. If he knew Chloe was actually Brenda from biology class, his ego would shatter. He was flaunting a lie to the world, and I was the only one holding the cipher key. My thumb hovered over the reply button on his text. It would be so easy to type 2 sentences and burn his fantasy to the ground. I could send him the yearbook photo. I could ruin his honeymoon before room service arrived. But then I looked at his smug face in the picture again. Telling him now would look like jealousy. It would look bitter. Letting him find out on his own, that was justice. I locked my phone and poured a glass of wine. I spent the next few days acting like a private investigator. The yearbook was compelling, but I needed absolute proof before I let myself believe it fully. I tracked down Hannah, a girl who used to run in Brenda's circle. We met for coffee in a noisy downtown cafe. I slid my phone across the chipped laminate table without saying a word. Hannah took one look, choked on her lat, and whispered, "Is that Brenda Mills?" Hannah leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "She disappeared about 5 years ago," she explained, tapping a manicured nail on the screen. "Went to South Korea for a year. Came back as Chloe." She listed the procedures like a grocery list: jaw shaving, rhinoplasty, brow lift, veneers. It wasn't just a makeover. It was a witness protection program for her own face. Brenda didn't just want to be pretty. She wanted to be someone else entirely. The irony was so sharp it felt like it could draw blood. I remembered a dinner party 3 years ago where Mark spent 20 minutes ranting about a colleague's wife who got lip fillers. "It's deceptive," he had sneered, swirling his expensive scotch. "If you reconstruct yourself, you're just lying to everyone." He worshipped authenticity, or at least his narrow definition of it. Now he was honeymooning with a woman who was 90% silicone and porcelain. A dark, twisting part of me wanted to print the before photos and mail them to his office. I imagined him opening the envelope in front of his partners, the color draining from his tan face. It would be the perfect revenge for the way he discarded me like trash. But as I sat in my living room, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon light, I hesitated. Mark would never believe me. He would call me crazy. That was the key realization. Mark didn't love Chloe. He didn't even know Chloe. He fell in love with a mirror that reflected his own vanity back at him. He wanted a trophy to validate his status. And Brenda wanted a man who saw her as a prize. They were two hollow people trying to fill each other up with validation. If I intervened, I would just be the bitter ex-wife trying to shatter their fragile glass house. I closed the yearbook and shoved it to the back of the closet, behind the winter coats I never wore. I wasn't going to save him. He made his choice when he walked out the door, without a backward glance. He wanted perfection, so let him live with the manufactured version of it. The truth has a nasty habit of surfacing on its own, usually when it is most inconvenient. I didn't need to be the messenger. I decided to let the clock do the heavy lifting for me. Mark was currently posting photos of them on a yacht in the Mediterranean, captioning them with hashtags about destiny and soulmates. I liked the post. It was a petty, small action, but it felt momentous. It was my way of signing off. I would watch from the sidelines as the paint started to chip. It was only a matter of time before the real face showed through. 3 months later, my life fit into a smaller, quieter box. I traded the sprawling colonial for a loft with exposed brick and drafty windows. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I spent my evenings staining mismatched chairs instead of hosting dinner parties for people I didn't like. The silence wasn't lonely anymore, it was restorative. I finally stopped checking his social media, cutting the last digital tether. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the ghost rattled his chains. A notification dinned while I was sanding a tabletop. It was an email from Mark's personal account, flagged as high priority. My stomach clenched, a reflex I hadn't unlearned yet. The subject line read, "Tax documents, to update." He could have sent this through the lawyers. He could have mailed it. But Mark never missed an opportunity to perform. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and opened it, bracing myself for another calculated blow to my dignity. The first 2 sentences were dry legalese about a joint investment account we forgot to close. Then, the tone shifted abruptly. "By the way," he wrote, "I thought you should know before you hear it from others. Chloe and I are expecting." The words sat there, heavy and smug. He went on to describe how thrilled his parents were. He didn't just share the news, he weaponized it. He wanted me to feel the hollow space in my own life. I scanned the next paragraph, and my jaw tightened. He rambled about legacy and the future of the Vance name, then came the line that made me freeze. "We are so relieved," he typed. "The doctor says the genetic profile is exceptional. Beauty and brains. Finally, I am securing a legacy worth having." It was a direct insult to me, but it was also a tragic misunderstanding of biology. He thought he was mixing premium paint. He didn't know the canvas was altered. I leaned back in my chair, waiting for the anger to come. I expected the familiar burn of inadequacy, the tears that used to follow his critiques. But nothing happened. Instead, a cold, clear pity washed over me. He was crowing about genetics while standing on a trapdoor. He was so obsessed with the surface that he forgot DNA doesn't care about rhinoplasty. The baby wouldn't look like the woman in the magazine spread. The baby would look like Brenda. Mark wasn't emailing me to share joy. He was emailing me because he was terrified. He needed an audience to validate his choices, even if that audience was the ex-wife he discarded. If he was truly happy, truly secure in his perfect life, I would be a distant memory. By reaching out, he proved he was still looking for approval. He was trying to convince me he won, which meant he wasn't entirely sure of it himself. I looked at the cursor blinking in the reply field. I could type a congratulations. I could make a snide comment about recessive genes. I could ask if Chloe had shown him her high school yearbook yet. But any response was fuel for his ego. I moved the mouse to the trash icon. I clicked once. The email vanished, taking his need for validation with it. I picked up the sandpaper and went back to work, leaving him to his silence. 6 months slipped by, bringing autumn leaves and a steady stream of gossip. The grapevine, fueled by mutual acquaintances, whispered that paradise was getting expensive. Mark had leveraged himself to the hilt to maintain the image of the power couple in their Santa Fe mansion. Apparently, perfection required a maintenance budget that even his salary couldn't sustain. I heard stories of quiet arguments in restaurants and staff being fired for minor infractions. The facade was cracking under the weight of its own price tag. The most curious rumor concerned Chloe herself. The woman who lived for the camera had suddenly vanished from the social circuit. Her Instagram feed became a graveyard of reposted landscapes and old modeling shots. People whispered that she was struggling with the pregnancy, but I suspected something deeper. She wasn't just sick, she was hiding. The physical reality of expanding and changing was incompatible with the sculpted mannequin Mark had purchased. She was terrified of letting the cracks in the porcelain show. I ran into the reality of their situation at a high-end nursery center downtown. I was buying a shower gift for my sister. Mark was there buying an image. He looked terrible. His tan had faded into a sallow gray, and the lines around his eyes were etched deep with exhaustion. He was barking into his phone about fabric swatches, his voice tight with a manic edge. When he saw me, he froze. For a second, his mask slipped, revealing pure panic. He recovered quickly, snapping the phone shut and smoothing his designer jacket. "Rachel," he said, his voice overly loud in the quiet store. "Shopping for a friend, I assume?" He looked me up and down, searching for a flaw to exploit. I held my ground, clutching a soft yellow blanket. "Just a gift, Mark. You look busy." He laughed, a harsh sound that made a passing clerk flinch. "Building a dynasty takes work. You wouldn't understand that level of ambition." He stepped closer, invading my personal space with the smell of stale coffee and expensive cologne. "Chloe is glowing," he lied, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "The baby is going to be magnificent. We already have modeling scouts interested." It was pathetic. He was trying to sell me on a dream that was clearly keeping him awake at night. He wasn't convincing me. He was desperately trying to convince himself the investment was sound. Then came the lash out I knew was waiting. He gestured vaguely at my face, where a few laugh lines crinkled near my eyes. You look tired, Rachel. Age catches up fast when you don't take care of yourself. He smirked, thinking he had landed a blow. Chloe takes her maintenance seriously. She knows her duty to the family image. It wasn't an insult to me, it was a confession. He was terrified of anything real. Anything that decayed. I didn't feel the sting he intended. I just felt relief that I wasn't the one under that microscope. Good luck, Mark, I said, stepping around him. I hope the reality lives up to the brochure. I walked out into the crisp air, leaving him standing alone among the overpriced cribs. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, guarding a secret that was about to be born. I got into my car and drove away, finally free. It was 2 a.m. when my phone vibrated against the nightstand, sounding like a drill in the quiet room. I fumbled for it, squinting at the screen through groggy eyes. It was Mark. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a mistake. But he called again immediately. This wasn't a casual check-in. I slid the icon to answer, clutching the cold device. Rachel. His voice was slurred and thick, wet with panic. I don't know who else to call. Mark, are you drunk? I sat up, pulling the duvet tight around my chest. Background noise filtered through the line. Hospital announcements and the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. He wasn't at a bar, he was in the maternity ward. She's here, he whispered, sounding like he was hiding in a supply closet. The baby. She was born 2 hours ago. He didn't sound like a proud father. He sounded like a man witnessing a crime. Something is wrong, Rachel. It's all terribly wrong. My heart hammered against my ribs. Is she sick? Is Chloe okay? I asked, my voice sharp with sudden fear. I hated them, but I didn't want a tragedy. They're healthy. Mark spat the word, tasting bitter in his mouth. Physically fine. But when the nurse handed her to me, I looked at her face. He took a ragged breath, the air hitching in his throat. She doesn't look like us. She has this beak. And a weak chin. God, Rachel, she's unfortunate looking. I thought she cheated. He continued, his voice rising in hysteria. I started screaming at the doctors. I demanded a paternity test right there in the delivery room. I closed my eyes, picturing the chaos he must have caused. The nurses trying to calm a man who was rejecting his child based on aesthetics. The nose, Rachel, it's huge. And her eyes are too close together. Chloe has perfect features. I have strong features. This baby looks like a stranger. I couldn't understand how this happened. The puzzle pieces finally slammed together for him, years too late. I gripped the phone tighter. What did Chloe say, Mark? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with the weight of a shattered illusion. She wouldn't look at me, he whispered. She just started crying, not happy tears, ugly, terrified sobbing. She told the nurses to take the baby away. She said she couldn't look at it. That's when I knew she was hiding something. She confessed, he said, his voice flat and dead. Everything, the chin implants, the nose job, the brow lift, the jaw shaving. He listed the procedures like an autopsy report. Her name isn't even Chloe, it's Brenda. She showed me a picture on her phone from high school. He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that turned into a sob. She was ugly, Rachel. She was completely ordinary. And she let me believe her face was real. She let me believe our children would be beautiful. I waited for him to express betrayal about the lies, about the lack of trust. But Mark, true to form, only cared about the surface. I can't fix this, he slurred. I can't parade that child around. People will know. They'll look at Chloe, then look at the kid. And they'll do the math. He wasn't worried about his wife's trauma or his daughter's future. He was worried about his brand. He viewed his own newborn daughter as a defective product that voided his warranty. She won't hold her, Mark added, a new layer of horror entering his voice. Chloe, Brenda, whatever her name is. She screams if they bring the baby near her. She says the baby looks like the girl she killed. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Brenda had spent thousands of dollars and years of pain to erase that face, and now it was staring back at her from a swaddled blanket. The self-hatred she carried had just been birthed into the world, loud and undeniable. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the late hour. There was no satisfaction in being right, only a deep, aching pity for that innocent child. She had entered the world carrying the weight of her parents' vanity, before she even took her first breath. Mark, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. That is your daughter. She is a person, not an accessory. You have to step up. I needed him to be a human being for once. I don't know if I can, he confessed. And the admission hung between us like a shroud. I didn't sign up for this. I wanted the dream, Rachel. I paid for the dream. He was waiting for me to absolve him, to tell him it was okay to walk away because he had been tricked. He wanted permission to be a monster. I listened to his breathing, ragged and selfish, and realized the silence was the only answer he deserved. The line went dead. 2 days passed in a haze of gray, rain and silence. I kept waiting for the news to break, for a sanitized announcement to hit social media. Instead, my phone rang again on Saturday afternoon. It was Mark. I stared at the screen, debating whether to let it ring out. But a dark curiosity pulled at me. I needed to know if he had found his soul, or if he was still drowning. I pressed answer, putting the phone to my ear without saying a word. I just listened to his ragged breathing. Rachel, please don't hang up, he rasped, his voice sounding like it had been shredded by days of shouting. I am at a hotel. I couldn't go back to the house. It feels like a museum of lies. He sounded pathetic, a far cry from the arrogance he wore like armor during the divorce. You know me better than anyone, he pleaded. You know I value truth. How am I supposed to live with this? I've been defrauded. He was still the victim in his own twisted narrative. I spoke to my lawyers this morning, he continued, the legal shark surfacing through the self-pity. We can annul the marriage based on fraud, misrepresentation of identity. It's a solid case. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. He wasn't talking about a business merger gone wrong, he was talking about a wife and a newborn child. I am going to cut ties, he said coldly. I'll pay child support, obviously. But I can't be associated with this. I can't look at them. The air in my apartment felt suddenly very thin. Mark wasn't just venting, he was asking for permission. He wanted his sensible, reliable ex-wife to tell him that abandoning his family was the logical choice. He wanted me to sign off on his cruelty so he could sleep at night. You want me to agree with you? I said, my voice steady and cold. You want me to say that beauty is a contract and she breached it. But I won't do that, Mark. You are disgusting. Don't get high and mighty with me. He snapped, the old aggression flaring up instantly. You didn't see her, Rachel. She rejected the baby first. She won't even feed her. The nurses are doing everything. He used Chloe's trauma as a shield for his own cowardice. I was tricked, he shouted, the sound distorting over the line. I married a goddess and woke up with a stranger. You would leave too. Anyone would leave. I am the injured party here, not her. You weren't tricked, Mark. I cut in, my tone razor sharp. You were just shallow. I walked to the window, watching the rain streak the glass. You never asked who she was. You never asked about her childhood, her scars or her stories. You just looked at the packaging and bought the product. I let the words land with the weight of an anvil. You didn't love Chloe. You loved how Chloe made you look to the world. And now that the reflection is cracked, you are done. Silence stretched on the line, heavy and suffocating. She did what she thought she had to do to be loved by a man like you. I continued, relentless. She erased herself because she knew you wouldn't look twice at Brenda Mills. And she was right. I felt a strange surge of power, a release of 10 years of suppressed opinions. You created this monster, Mark. You and your obsession with perfection. You demanded a fantasy, and she cut herself apart to give it to you. I need you to talk to her, he whispered, his voice cracking. She might listen to you. You are reasonable. The audacity took my breath away. He wanted me to act as a mediator in the wreckage of the marriage that replaced mine. No, I said. And the word felt like a locked door. I am not your fixer. I am not your emotional safety net. I am the woman you threw away because I was too real for you. I'm not cleaning up your mess. That baby is the only honest thing in your entire life. I told him, my voice softening just a fraction. She has her mother's real eyes and your real nose. She is the truth you've been running from. I could hear him weeping now, soft, pathetic sobs of a man who realized he had nowhere left to hide. I hope she grows up strong, I added. I hope she learns to love the face she was born with. Despite having parents who despise it. Don't call me again, Mark, I said, finality ringing in every syllable. Not when you file the papers. Not when you find your next victim. I'm done. I pulled the phone away from my ear before he could respond. I didn't just hang up, I went into the settings and blocked his number. Then I blocked his email. I stood in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the rain. The cord was cut. I wasn't waiting for him to wake up anymore. I was free. 1 year later, the silence in my loft felt like a luxury rather than a void. The morning light hit the exposed brick, warming the space where I set up my easel. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something durable. My phone sat on the table, quiet and unblocked, because there was no one left to fear. I brewed coffee, the smell of dark roast filling the air. It was a simple Saturday, unburdened by performance or pretense. I finally owned my time. The news about Mark filtered through the grapevine like static. He divorced Chloe 3 months after the birth, citing irreconcilable differences to the public and fraud to anyone who listened. He was back on the market, but the shine was gone. Friends said he looked older, harder, and desperate. He spent his weekends in loud bars, chasing women half his age who didn't know his history. He was a man haunting his own life, searching for a reflection that no longer existed anywhere. As for Chloe, she vanished as quickly as she appeared. Rumor had it she moved back to the Midwest, shedding the alias like a dead snake skin. I hoped she took the baby. I hoped that somewhere, away from the spotlight and the crushing pressure, she learned to look at her daughter without wincing. Brenda Mills had tried to outrun her shadow, but it caught her in the delivery room. She was a cautionary tale whispered at parties, a ghost story about erasure. I heard a key turn in the lock, followed by the heavy thud of grocery bags. David walked in, his hair messy from the wind, carrying fresh oranges and a grin. He didn't care about status or image. He loved my laugh lines and the paint stains on my fingers. We didn't post our relationship online. We didn't curate our moments for an audience. We just lived them. It was messy and real, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection Mark chased. Later that evening, I found the old manila folder tucked in a drawer. It held the initial divorce decree and the printout of Mark's wedding announcement. For a long time, I kept them as proof of my pain. Now, they just looked like scrap paper. I took them to the fire escape, holding a lighter against the cool night breeze. The flame caught the corner of the photograph, curling the edges of the perfect couple. I watched them turn to ash and float away. I leaned against the railing, watching the city lights blink below. I thought back to that moment in the kitchen, the hysterical laughter that bubbled up when I saw her face. I realized now that it wasn't cruelty. It was the subconscious recognition that I had escaped a burning building. Mark spent his life running toward an illusion, while I was forced to walk into the hard truth. I wasn't the one who was discarded, I was the one who was set free.